Hello, and welcome everyone to the 17th webinar in Contact's Produce Safety webinar series and the premiere of Season 3. This third season continues to tackle fresh produce safety topics every month through a dynamic webinar series that brings together industry, academia, and regulatory minds to solve some of the produce industry's most timely challenges. This series is part of a larger industry outreach and risk mitigation project called Contact, where scientific challenges and cost-effective management of risks associated with implementation of produce safety regulations. This project is supported by a Specialty Crops Research Initiative grant from the USDA National Institute of Food and Agriculture. Any opinions, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this presentation are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the view of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Who is Contact? I'm Dr. Laura, your fearless webinar host, but what you may not see is all the behind-the-scenes players. Dr. Alexis Hamilton, who scripts your key takeaways, and my webinar co-pilot. Dr. Michelle Daniluk, who is our grant team leader from the University of Florida, and we have over 10 universities and government institutions that make up the Contact team, which is comprised of over 50 faculty, staff, students, and volunteers, not to mention the support of our PAC. While I cannot list all their names, please see all the logos. It takes a village, and I thank each and every one of you. This year, we'll begin each webinar with an update about one of Contact's 7 research or outreach objectives. This month, we're talking about Objective 7, Education and Outreach. This objective focused on developing surveys of the fresh produce industry to better understand their food safety priorities and practices around pre-harvest agricultural water, BSOWs, post-harvest water, and EMP use. These webinars and forthcoming curricula are based around the most up-to-date science and best practices. We've surveyed 2 initial groups, the larger fresh produce safety community, like all of us, and then our grants produce advisory committee. As you can see, the top 5 priority areas identified differ, except post-harvest sanitation. Health and hygiene was ranked of highest importance with the fresh produce safety community, while the PAC ranked adjacent land use of highest importance. The paper dives deeper, and hopefully I have piqued your curiosity. If I haven't, one more sneak peek. Here we look at the top 5 rankings of produce safety community by role or size and colorized by placement in the fresh produce supply chain. The key is at the bottom of the screen. Priority rankings differed by operation, size, and role. While we could spend an entire webinar discussing this data, be on the lookout for the paper. This year's webinar series will address topics chosen by you. These 2 webinars on root cause analysis were specifically requested in evaluations. Don't forget to quickly tell us your thoughts in the survey evaluations as you exit the webinar. We've got an exciting list of webinars scheduled for this year covering topics like energizing your employee training programs and keeping them fresh, and the highly anticipated sanitation at retail, back of house, front of mind. Be sure to check out the Contact website and the YouTube page for more produce safety resources, including any key takeaway documents, webinar recordings, and much more. Subscribe to our page to get instant notifications of content like our mini webinars. If you use biological soil amendments of animal origin, we'd also appreciate if you helped by taking our BSOW survey. We want to know how you use these BSOWs on the farm, so scan or click on this QR code. If you scan the QR code, it will take you to the Rutgers Qualtrics survey page. Please scroll all the way down to the bottom to consent to the survey, which is only about 10 questions. Sorry for the red tape as we take your confidentiality and human subject protections seriously. A quick reminder for today, if you would like to submit a question for our speakers during or before the Q&A session, please submit your questions through the Q&A box and not the chat box. Now let's welcome moderator, Dr. Jennifer McEntire. Dr. McEntire is founder of Food Safety Strategy. She's a food microbiologist by background and has worked to bring scientific perspective to food safety regulatory issues. Dr. McEntire has held several produce and food safety leadership positions, most recently with the International Fresh Produce Association, formerly United Fresh. I promised short bios this season, and due to some live polling fun, I'm going to work in the background. So welcome, Jen. The floor is yours to introduce us to our fabulous root cause analysis part 1 team.
I think Jen may have dropped off the call.
All right, then I'm going to keep on going then. So with that, I am going to let Dr. Don give a short bio about himself.
Sure. My name is Don Schaffner. I'm Extension Specialist and Distinguished Professor at Rutgers University. On July 1st of this year, for some reason that's not completely clear to me, I also stepped up to become chair of the department. I'm still happy to be here today and talk with all of you. We do research in predictive food microbiology and quantitative microbial risk assessment, and I'm excited to be here today to talk to you about root cause analysis.
Awesome. We're glad to have you. And you run 2 really successful podcasts. Dr. Mark Mormon, can you come off of mute and introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks. My name is Mark Mormon. I'm Director of Office of Food Safety at the Food and Drug Administration. And I've been with the government for, it's going on a little over 4 years. Prior to that, 30 years in the private sector, food manufacturing, and then prior to that, test methods, analytical testing laboratory. Thrilled to be here, Laura.
Yeah, we're really glad to have you and really glad to have some FDA guests. Greg, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, Laura. Hi, Greg Palmar with the California LGMA, Leafy Greens Marketing Agreement. I've been with the LGMA for a little over 4 years now, and previous to that, worked in industry for about 25 years or so. I call it in technical aspects of agriculture, seed breeding, regulatory compliance at the farm and processing level. So happy to be here as well. Thanks.
Really glad to have you. And Natalie, all the way from Hong Kong, would you like to introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone, or I guess it's afternoon there. My name is Natalie Dyenson. I am the Chief Food Safety and Regulatory Officer for International Fresh Produce Association. I've been here just under 2 months, maybe it's 6.5 weeks, something like that. And prior to that, I worked for Dole and then a little retailer and Theme Park A. So I am super happy to be here and looking forward to the series this season.
Awesome. Until Jen joins us, I am going to live poll and host this webinar. So we wanted to do something a little fun and different this season. So we're of course going to have our presentations and go through our content, but we wanted you to all play along with us. So I'm hoping you guys all have your cell phone handy at wherever you are, and you can go to Mentimeter and start to answer and play along with us.
Looks like we've got grower safety, but quite a mix, not surprising given the number of people who are on this webinar. An impressive, wow, can we hit 400 people on today? That would be pretty awesome. But it's great to see such a diverse group, and we'll give it another couple minutes. We've got still shy of 100 responses here that have come in, but everybody can see that it's a nice mix of people. And I hope that this means that we'll have some really excellent questions at the end. People can volunteer questions anytime as we go through the speakers today. We do have a couple more poll questions. Think that if you have not typed in your response just yet, please, if you're still working on getting the Mentimeter going, please go ahead and keep doing that because we've got a couple more questions. But Laura, why don't we move on to the next question now? And so the next question, just to get a feel for the group, do you think what root cause analysis is? So our topic that we'll be discussing here today. So you've got a couple choices, and we can see again a pretty good diversity here, although many of you seem to have some familiarity with the topic. Hopefully you'll still find value in what you hear on this webinar today. I appreciate those of you brave enough to say no or unsure. But I know that there's been a lot of discussion around root cause analysis. And so I'm glad that the term is familiar to a lot of people. As Laura, I'm sure, mentioned, and as you likely know, this is a two-part series. And so today's really the setting that foundation, laying the groundwork, and we'll delve into the weeds a bit more next month. Let's go ahead and move on to the next poll. We've got two more. The next question is, have you yourself, given, again, diverse audience here, lots of people, different backgrounds, have you ever actually participated in something that you would consider a root cause analysis, whether you're from the government side, the industry side, academia, somewhere else? Do you have that firsthand experience? And if so, and it looks like about half, maybe a little more than half of you do, it would be great to hear a little bit more about it, and hope that you'll contribute to the session next month where we're talking about, so what do you actually do? Here's the theory, but in practice, what does this actually look like? It's interesting to me that there's such a split between the yeses and the nos here, with, again, still about half of you having done something in the realm of root cause analysis before. And let's look at the last question, which I think is the most interesting question, I think. And we'll invite each of the speakers, as they are giving their talks, if they want to reflect on any of what they've seen here, they are absolutely welcome to do so. I hear excuses from time to time, barriers to doing a root cause analysis or to doing a thorough, robust root cause analysis. And so wanted to get your sense, either from your personal experience, which again, many of you have, or for those of you who perhaps maybe had a situation, didn't pursue doing a root cause analysis. Why not? What are those barriers and what are those difficulties? I'm pretty surprised by this one, that about half of you almost are looking at technical expertise being a barrier. Not surprised that many of you say time. If you're willing to volunteer at some point during the session, what those 11, 12% of you are that say other, kind of curious to what we missed here in the poll options. So please do go ahead and let us know. It could be very informative for next month to understand some of those other barriers to doing a root cause analysis as we put that session together. I think we've got a good sense here, and so let's continue on, Laura. Don, I will turn it over to you. Thanks for introducing yourself. I know many of us know you, and excited to hear your introduction to RCA.
I'm interested to hear what I have to say as well. So thanks, and thanks to Laura for the invitation. This is one of several of the topics that Laura asked me to cover. Oh, and I will say too, I generally talk at about one slide per every 2 minutes, but I've made far too many slides to finish this on time. So I've got a timer going here. I'm going to watch my time very carefully, and I am going to keep this under 10 minutes. When Laura asked me to do a presentation on root cause analysis, I said, sure, that's great. I'm happy to do it. But just tell me one thing. What is RCA? Because when I think of RCA, I think of that picture of that cute little dog listening to the phonograph, not root cause analysis. First thing I had to learn was, what does RCA stand for? It stands for root cause analysis. You may also hear the term root cause investigation used, and at least in terms of food safety, people will often talk about environmental assessment as being synonymous with root cause analysis. So I think I've dispensed with my first task, which is defining these terms for you. Next slide, please. So honestly, it's not a joke. I really did not know what was root cause analysis. I'd heard about it, but never having done one myself, I really needed to figure out what it was. And one thing I discovered as I began to dig into it is it's not just one thing. And three names basically kept coming up over and over again. And the first one was Shikishi Toyoda, who was instrumental in founding the Toyota Motor Company. And that's not a typo. His last name is spelled with a D, but the car company is spelled with a T. And you can see the years that he lived. And he was very famous for this idea of the 5 whys. And so one thing that you'll hear as you hear about root cause analysis is you'll hear one of the techniques is the 5 whys. Now, I particularly like this diagram which was not necessarily proposed by Mr. Toyota, because it's an infinite circle. So you just keep asking why, and you never actually solve the problem. Hopefully that's not the way that we're going to do root cause analysis. Hopefully we're going to get to a root cause or potential many root causes. Another name that comes up very often is Walter Schuhart. And you can see the years that he was alive. He is famous for this idea of continuous improvement. Plan, do, check, act. And you will see that again in the root cause analysis literature. Now here, we are still going around in a circle, but now hopefully we're doing it with the idea of continuous improvement. And then finally, you'll hear about fishbone diagrams, which were proposed by Ishikawa. And I picked an actual fishbone diagram that looks like a fish. The idea being is that the causes come in from the side, and then you end up at the head of the fish where you have what is the effect. So that's another technique for doing RCA. Next slide, please. So where has RCA been applied? I've talked about this already. It has its origins, its modern origins in manufacturing, specifically by the Toyota Motor Company. It's been used in space flight. It's been used for civilian aviation, with extensive use in healthcare. And in fact, if you go to the peer-reviewed literature, what you find is that most examples in the peer-reviewed literature are around healthcare, and I'm going to talk about that. Now, I've color-coded this slide. I think we would all agree that Toyota is a pretty successful company today, and certainly we've seen dramatic improvements in civilian aviation. I put used in spaceflight in red here because I think that's an example of a lack of success. It turns out we had the same root causes underlying the Challenger disaster, and then almost a decade later, or at least a decade later, the Columbia disaster. So if you're doing root cause analysis and you have the same root causes causing similar problems, that's probably an example of how you're not doing it right. And again, you'll see I'm going to go into some detail later on in my remarks talking about healthcare and the problems that has revealed. Next slide, please. So I really liked this particular diagram. This is from an article that appeared in the Proceedings of the World Congress of Engineering in 2012. The title of the article was "The Shortcomings of Existing Root Cause Analysis Tools." So any title like that is going to grab me, and I did read the article, and I came across this wonderful diagram. You're not meant to necessarily read all of the details. Certainly you can take a look for the article, and you can blow it up on your screen and look at it in great detail. But what you can see is a list of features of these different tools going down the left-hand side, and then all of the tools, or at least the tools identified by this researcher, across the top of the diagram. So RCA is not necessarily one thing. There are multiple tools, and of course there are advantages and disadvantages to all of those tools. Next slide, please. So I've entitled the following slides, which I'm going to move through pretty quickly here, Lessons from the Scientific Literature. And what I've done in each of these slides is the first line, or each of these bullet points. The first line is the title of the article, the second one is the year, and then the sub-bullet points are the take-home messages. And they're in roughly chronological order. So we start, and I tried to only look at the relatively recent literature. So here's an article from 2008. There apparently seems to be anecdotal evidence of improved safety, but these researchers point out numerous theoretical problems with this analytical framework. Another article whose title I really like because it includes that canonical London phrase, "mind the gap." They point out something here which I think is very interesting. RCA was originally conceived as a learning technique. In some cases, it's been used as a governance tool and to reestablish organizational legitimacy. And of course, having those different, diverse, and contradictory aims creates tension within the process. And so this might explain some of the reasons why we've been unsuccessful in terms of root cause analysis in the past. And then also, this article identified that efforts may be diverted from producing sustainable change and improvement because of the way RCA is implemented. Next slide, please. I love this title. There's no bullet point. The title tells the story. Successful risk assessment may not always lead to successful risk control. And this was a 2012 article on risk control after root cause analysis. So we're going to a lot of time and trouble to do this, but guess what? It may not always work. I love the title of this next article. The literal title of the article is "The Problem with Root Cause Analysis" from 2016. And I think this is an important one too. The phrase root cause analysis actually drives us towards looking for a single cause. And in fact, many problems may not result from a single cause. They may result from a confluence of causes. And so by setting things up perhaps with a fishbone diagram, this promotes us thinking about things in terms of a linear analysis. And so if we are driven towards a linear analysis, that may mean that we miss some complexities and some nuances. And of course, if it's a simple linear narrative, that's going to drive us towards a temporal narrative, beats in time, rather than maybe looking at things more holistically or more with a systems view. Next slide, please. Another great title: Our Current Approach to Root Cause Analysis. Is it contributing to our failure to improve patient safety? And again, many of these come from healthcare. This is one example. I like these. I like this level of detail in the abstract as well. The common solutions proposed were training, process change, and policy reinforcement. Those resonate with me in terms of food safety. They may resonate with you as well. But unfortunately, many multiple event types were repeated in the study period, despite repeated root cause analysis. So we're doing this root cause analysis over and over again. We don't necessarily seem to be getting any better, at least in terms of healthcare. And then this next article from 2018 on framework for tool selection. There are multiple tools. We already established that in an earlier slide. And so basically, and this is what I discovered in my review of the literature, there is really, the literature does not point out a means for selecting the appropriate tool based on somewhat objective performance criteria. So that leads us to trouble. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. It's my final slide. I'm almost right on time. This most recent article from 2019, reviews of alternatives to root cause analysis. They concluded the best method to investigate root causes is unclear. So I had finished writing this slide and I said to myself, where do I go? And then for some reason, this Robert Frost poem popped into my head. Miles to go before I sleep. I think we have miles to go with respect to root cause analysis. Certainly, the scientific literature is lovely, dark, and deep, and there's many more things that we can explore. But I have promises to keep too, and one of the promises is to stay on time. So with that concludes my remarks. Thanks.
Thank you, Don. Don mentioned he didn't have a whole lot of real life experience doing the root cause analysis. Thanks for that overview. Mark, we'll turn it over to you. I know that you have a fair amount of experience doing it, and looking forward to your talk of the what and the why.
Thanks, everybody. Don, thanks for the setup. Yeah, so my name is Mark Moorman. I'm the director of the Office of Food Safety. Step back for a moment. There's about 200 of us in this office that are experts in all categories of the grocery store, as we like to talk about it. Big categories that we spend a lot of time focusing on, of course, is produce and the subject of today's group, but we also have lots of experts in the seafood, dairy, and every aisle in between. We spend time on policy compliance, prevention strategies, which I'll talk more about in a moment, training and research. Let's go to the next slide. And I'm going to start off with really telling you the key messages up front. Root cause analysis adoption is a very important effort for us in the new era of smarter food safety. Recall that in the new era, there's 4 buckets of work. There's tech-enabled traceability. There's this that we're talking about here, smarter tools and approaches for prevention and outbreak response. There's new business models and retail monetization for those of us that purchase food and have them delivered by transportation companies. That's part of that new models. And then finally, food safety culture. It is core element 2 on smarter tools that includes an effort to invigorate root cause analysis. And within that, there's two work streams. There's to encourage industry adoption. And what's unique about New Era is much of the New Era effort isn't based upon us, like in FSMA, advancing regulations. We are here to encourage adoption. In FSMA regulated foods, the reality is we can't require firms to do anything more than to take corrective actions in the event of adverse data. We can't sit here today and say in FSMA PC regulated space, you must conduct root cause analysis. That's today. The second thing, and really important what I'm talking about, is that we're using it ourselves. As an agency, we're conducting root cause analysis or embarking upon that at outbreaks. We are ramping up on this, and our work will lead us to reporting what we find in the hope that this helps prevent a recurrence. And then finally, what I'll talk to is on the prevention strategies. And quite simply, you can't solve a problem you don't understand. You can't solve a problem you don't understand. And in leading this office, there's just way too many outbreaks. And we sit back and we think, how do we prevent them? And it's all predicated on us understanding the causative factors so that we can put in place preventative measures as an agency or work with other stakeholders, growers, et cetera, to build those preventative measures. You can't solve a problem you don't understand. Those are the 3 points for today. Next slide. I want to camp out on something that we're good at and things that we're not so good at. First, the good. I believe the agency, the FDA, particularly our core coordinated outbreak response and evaluation team, is getting pretty doggone good at the what and the where. This is identifying, hey, this is the food through attribution that made people sick. Here's where that food is, and working with the firms, getting it out of the marketplace. That's the most important public health thing you can do when bad foods are made, is to get out of the marketplace. The good news is traceability is going to get that group to great, where we'll be able to, my mom for 3 weeks and your family members could have purchased bad onions that were in the marketplace. We knew there were salmonella in onions, but the supply chain couldn't figure out where they were. And that's completely unacceptable. And so traceability is going to be a big part of us getting to a place where we can identify bad food and bam, get out of the marketplace. What we're not as good at, and our biggest opportunity for all of us on this call, is to get to the how and the why. How did that food become contaminated and why? This is really hard. All of us have gone to conferences forever and people get up and talk about outbreaks, and so often it talks about the manufacturer and what the food was and maybe a little bit on processing, but it doesn't get to the actual how and the why. And that's where we got to get. But that's actually the hardest part. And you know what? We're not alone in this. Remember that there is a Malaysian Air 370 that crashed some time back, 10 years ago, maybe 6 years ago. They still don't know why that thing crashed. There's GPS, lots of engineering, and they've been unable to solve that. That's a highly sophisticated engineering space, and they could not figure that out. Interestingly, in the case of bank robberies, about 40% of bank robberies aren't solved, or the person's not apprehended. They've got cameras, fingerprints, cell phones. Wow, there's a lot. I bring all this up that we've got to calibrate that in the food safety discipline. We try to get to the how and the why, but we haven't been as disciplined at deploying a methodology to get us closer to the how and the why. Hopefully I'm making the argument, we're not as good as we need to be in that space. The methodology is root cause analysis. This discipline that we're in is evolving. And my hope is that you all take this home as to the key message on the why, is that our discipline is evolving. If Laura and Jennifer had a mathematics webinar, that's a 4,000-year-old discipline. Microbiology is about 300. In fact, Anton von Leeuwenhoek died August, just last month, 300 years ago. Yeah, he's the first person that saw single-celled organisms, bacteria, red blood cells, and others. He called them animalcules. We're a 300-year-old discipline. And in 300 years, we've gone from a microscope, not sure what it was, to whole genome sequencing in biotics. That is like getting to a Hubble telescope. What that means to all of us is, number one, these are massive advancements. And number two, it is likely this is going to lead to more identifications of clusters of illness and, sadly, detection of more outbreaks. Does it mean our food is less safe? I would argue we know more now. The associations that led to contamination, we just didn't know about, and they didn't result in us detecting illness. And I believe those days are numbered. We've got to evolve. If you are on this call, you're involved in what I would argue is the single most challenging problem that we have in the discipline of food microbiology, and that is the movement of pathogens from animal agriculture to produce farms. The FDA is partnering in California and Arizona with multiple partners in academia, industry, other stakeholders, large agriculture, to better understand this movement through longitudinal studies. My point here is that we all have a long ways to go. And that's really the value of the hunger and humility to learn. I want to make this point that I've been guilty myself of over the years of stating we don't compete in the space of food safety, but I would argue we don't share as much as we should or we need to. And to be clear, as I looked at this and prepared for this seminar, if I could have redone this slide, I would have also put the FDA on point for sharing more. And I want to state that as we reimagine the human foods program, we are looking at doing more sharing. And I'm going to show you one of the ways that we are. So I'll finish with a slide to say that you simply can't solve a problem you don't understand, and hence root cause analysis. Next slide, please. I'm going to try to distill this down into the simplest of terms to say that there's two steps. This is how the foods program, FDA, is looking at this. Step one is a deep dive investigation to collect facts, and it's what we're calling a root cause investigation. This is as soon as we've detected an outbreak. And keep in mind, we're talking root cause analysis for outbreaks. Does it have to be only used for outbreaks? No, it can be used for any adverse event. The single most important step is maximum curiosity. And I sit here today being responsible with the team for advancing root cause analysis and say the single, what I would argue is a major impediment is curiosity. I'll talk more about that in a moment, but I believe we have to ask ourselves, are we curious? Because it's going to require effort to chase down the facts. Step two is the methodology. And as the FDA is looking at it, this is deployed after the event. It's a methodology. Step one's the investigation. Get all the facts. Step two is the methodology. And Don teed up the 5 whys. I think it's a tremendous way to think about root cause analysis. And I'm going to slide on that in a moment. I do want to hit on what I think is a very important point on root cause analysis. And as I sit back and look at our category, it's a great concern that I have is that we'll conflate challenger type incidents and O-rings with what can be a routine effort of root cause analysis. If you read the Challenger report, it is massive, multi-year efforts, multi-millions of dollars. Let me give you an analogy. You're in your car, you back the car out of the garage and you oil on the garage floor. The first question you got to ask is, are you curious? I will tell you, there was a day when I was in school and I was broke, and if the car was running, I did not care. I needed to get from point A to point B. I didn't have money to fix the car. And so I was going to drive it in the ground. My hope is if you're on this call, that's not your mindset. In fact, it's not the mindset of anybody in produce, where it's about prevention. And you can't take that mindset if you're in a prevention space. If you are curious, there's 2 outcomes. Number one, you get under the car. And maybe you'll get lucky and you'll see there's a loose oil plug lug nut. You grab the wrench, you tighten it up. Man, that was simple. It didn't cost you 20 cents to get to that. Or you might find there is no loose plug, and it's going to require extensive diagnosis. In fact, expensive dealership work to replace the head gasket. That's going to be thousands and thousands of dollars. The point here is it depends on the problem, which is the first step of root cause analysis, is to describe the problem. Let me move on to the 5 whys, because I like this, and it's a pretty simple way of thinking about root cause analysis. We've got a hypothetical, and by the way, I stole this slide, well, actually with permission from Tim Jackson, who used it at IFP, but I really liked it. You got Listeria monocytogenes recovered from frankfurters. What the heck? Why? You discovered the frankfurters were contaminated when passing through the peeler. Well, why is that? The peelers harbored Listeria monocytogenes during the operation. Interesting. Ask why. The cleaning crew did not effectively clean the peeling equipment. Okay. Why is that? As it turns out, the peeler could not be easily disassembled for cleaning. So maybe it wasn't the cleaning crew didn't do their job. They couldn't. In fact, when you dig deeper, the final why, the peeler had a lot of parts that were really hard to remove. So what's the corrective action? Let's not can the cleaning crew. It's not throw away the peeler. It's not it's not everything in between. It's fundamentally a redesign of the peeler for cleaning. And it's about training the engineers, both the manufacturer of the equipment and perhaps the people that installed it, in hygienic design. That's what root cause analysis is to lead you to. Next slide, please. So industry and root cause analysis, I was really interested in everybody's perspective on the polls. I love those polls. My two that I came to this seminar with, from my experiences, there's often in industry a move on mindset. We just got done pulling all that food out of the trade. We're down. We've got to get that line up. We don't have time to dig into the problem. Or number two, there's an arrogance. You know what? We already know the problem. It was Hank, and he didn't clean. Was it? Interestingly, all of you commented that there's a need for technical expertise. The good news is this week and next you're at the right spot to help you with that. And then secondly, time. We're all crunched for time. I get that. I'll finish with this point. There is a great collective need when root cause analysis is done for more sharing across the industry. We all have a lot to learn, all of us in this space of produce. And my great hope is that we adopt, as in the aviation industry, with a culture of sharing. Next slide, please. Why is the FDA doing it? And what is the story? The FDA is doing this as follows. We have built an SOP, a standard operating procedure. We are in the midst of getting our ORA, our technical staff within the Human Foods Program, trained on the root cause analysis SOP. We are working with the states. We're working, engaging the states that have rapid response teams to work with us on a pilot to conduct this root cause analysis SOP at the time of the outbreak. We're looking to start this pilot yet in 2023. Why are we doing root cause analysis? We don't make food. We're doing it for two reasons. Number one, to inform the prevention efforts. We are all about trying to figure out what the causative factors are so we can collectively identify what levers of prevention have to be pulled. And number two, so that we can tell a story. We feel that a very important aspect of the FDA's work here is to tell a story as to what happened. And I do want to make this final point here, is that if a firm does an effective root cause analysis post-outbreak, the agency isn't interested in replicating that. We have plenty of other things to do, and it's our hope that after an outbreak, that firms will engage with us, share us their root cause analysis so that we can all learn from that. We don't intend to repeat it if a firm does a very thorough root cause analysis. Okay, let me tell you a story, and then I'm going to finish up. This is an outbreak investigation report that we did on a summer 2020 outbreak of Salmonella in peaches. Next slide, please. In 2020, there were 110 illnesses occurring across 17 states. Laura, next slide if you can, please. There it is. Thank you. I want to be clear that an investigation was done and it did not reveal the outbreak strain of Salmonella enteritidis. But you know what? We learned something on the way to Grandma's house. And that's what this figure is, and I want to explain it. The team looked at what the traceback was telling us on the peach orchards that could be implicated or were implicated as farms, orchards that could have provided the peaches. They did geospatial mapping to ask a question: what the heck's around all of these peach orchards? What they discovered through geospatial mapping is that there were a couple of animal agriculture operations. And through some great work that was directed by our Produce Safety Network team, our Samira Sar's team and produce safety, is they directed further investigations, root cause investigations, to climb trees and to sample the dust, and we're calling it fugitive dust, that was around the perimeter of those peach orchards. So if you look at that figure, you see the yellow dots? Those were where we actually climbed up peach trees on the perimeter of these implicated orchards and pulled dust samples. We sent those dust samples off to be tested, and the blue dots and the red dots were salmonella positives. The message here is that those, in the case of the blue dots, if you look at a dairy farm, the salmonella strains that were pulled out, in this case, the Salmonella montevideo, those strains on that dust, on those peach trees, matched strains that were originating from poultry, from cattle operations. On the other side, you remember driving around, you see those big old fans coming out of poultry operations. You can see that there's lots of dust coming from those. Sampled those trees and found that indeed those peach trees, sampled the dust and found that those isolates matched the poultry boilers in the NCBI database. What's the story? Fugitive dust, folks, moved to the perimeter trees of these orchards. The point here is the impact of adjacent lands, animal agriculture impacting produce field. It took curiosity and effort to dig deeper to find those causative factors. And I want to be clear, this is not unusual. This type of situation occurs. These two industries grew up together. Next slide. All right, I want to finish up with this. These are the prevention strategies that our office has advanced. We have 4 of them. There are many that are in the queue. Soft queso fresco cheeses, enoki mushrooms, woodier mushrooms, bulb onions, and then powdered infant formula. Here we are seeking to drive to the causative factors. Here we're seeking to identify all the levers of prevention, not just the ones the FDA can take, but the ones that everybody can take, all the stakeholders in the space, from training, what have you, to get to reducing reoccurrence of that hazard. Laura, those are my key messages. This is why we're adopting root cause analysis as part of New Era. We are conducting this so that we can tell a story and ultimately inform our prevention efforts. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with all of you today.
Great examples, and good to hear the FDA perspective. We're going to move ahead with Greg Komar from California LGMA, talking a little bit about the resources that are available, many of which have been developed by industry associations and other industry stakeholders. So Greg, please.
Great, thank you. So you see on this first slide, I have the Western Growers emblem along with LGMA. I am remiss, I should have added the Arizona LGMA as well, because over the years, the 3 organizations have partnered pretty significantly to develop some resources for the leafy greens industry, but also the greater produce industry, especially of the Western states. So I just, again, the 3 organizations have worked really closely over the years to try to assist the industry with resource development, and Western Growers is a really large part of that. So just wanted to make sure that everyone was clear. When I speak of LGMA and some of the resources we have, a lot of that work was conducted and created by the Western Growers group. So next slide, please. What I wanted to do was to give the group here a little bit of a timeline. So Don gave a timeline of the overarching root cause, the origins of root cause analysis, and it's close to 200 years old, perhaps at this stage. But when it comes to the fresh produce industry, it's very clear that we are in our infancy when it comes to root cause analysis. And so what I wanted to do was show some of the milestones in the past few years that have really, we're now in a very hyperactive mode with root cause analysis and preventive approaches to try to prevent these outbreaks from occurring and whatnot. But I wanted to start with, and I am embellishing this a little bit. We're in 2010, and I'm not even quite sure that was the exact year, but early on, when I was in a different role before the LGMA, my colleagues over at the Arizona, the Yuma area, specifically Vicki Scott, who I've worked with over the years in a lot of different developments and resource development, asked me to come and give a presentation about CAPA, so corrective action, preventive actions, and the role of potentially using root cause analysis to try to really reduce the amount of repeat nonconformances that were happening in the industry. So think about if you're a produce food safety person or anyone, you've had a lot of audits over the years, but in the early 2000s, we had GAP audits, we had the Global Food Safety Initiative, and then we had some other audits, and then the LGMAs came about. But all of those audits at some stage required some sort of a corrective action when there was a nonconformance found. And in the LGMAs in particular, we have 100% compliance requirement. So if you have a nonconformance during one of our inspections as a member, you have to fix those issues. But that doesn't mean those issues don't come up again. And Mark or Don mentioned, what is the value of some of these things? And I have a different perspective on that. I think these are really valuable. I think implementation is different than root cause, and we can talk about that for a little while and maybe even a philosophical discussion. But that was the goal. And back, a couple years, probably 13 or 14 years ago or whatever it was, the idea was, how do we prevent reoccurrence of corrective actions that we're seeing? And so that kind of started the idea of using the idea of root cause analysis in the produce industry. Specifically, this is leafy greens and fresh produce, but how do we use these types of tools to prevent reoccurrence? That was the real big driver. And then move forward almost 10 years later in 2019, the LGMAs passed some pretty new water requirements. And so a lot of you folks are aware that the LGMAs require water treatment. If water is going to be contacting the edible portion of the crop within 21 days of a harvest, and that water doesn't meet what we call type A standard, that water needs to be treated with a sanitizer. When we put all of those requirements into place, we also added requirements for root cause analysis in certain circumstances if there was a water system failure. That was a really big deal. It was one of the first times that I know of a produce person that there was actually a requirement to do some sort of root cause analysis. And the partners that they are, Western Growers, helped create what we call Appendix R, which is a document that helps folks perform review, again, root cause analysis. We call it a risk assessment, if you will. There's different terms. Don mentioned that as well, but a root cause analysis on what was the issue, because in our metric, we said, if you have a problem, you need to find that problem and fix that problem. So that was the mentality, find and fix. Move forward another year, Western Growers creates more root cause analysis resources, because as we start moving down the mode of what are issues that we're finding in our farms, they're not just all water related. And so what do we do if it's not a water related issue? We needed other resources for that. So Western Growers created additional resources. And then in that same year, the LGMAs and Western Growers started performing some root cause analysis workshops. So to the point earlier with that earlier poll, folks, why aren't you doing these things? The technical expertise, I would say it's not even technical expertise, it's just basic understanding and implementation of these things. How do you even do them? What's the beginning starting point? There's just a lot of need out there. Folks don't know how to do this. So we started at the very beginning, basic level with these workshops about what are root cause and how you might conduct them. And we've done a few over the years. It's not a really big part of our program from a training perspective, and I'll go into what's potentially next in that area. And then the LGMA enhances root cause analysis requirements again in 2021. So as I was saying, we're constantly evolving our requirements for root cause analysis. And so now in the LGMAs, if there's a significant concern that occurs on a farm, we tell the members to do a root cause analysis on that to see if they can find what caused that issue. It's not just a water issue. 2022, a year later, Western Growers creates additional root cause analysis resources. You can see Western Growers has been a big partner with us on this root cause analysis. Again, that how do we incentivize the root cause analysis? How do we get people to do this? And how do we get folks to share information? As Mark was mentioning earlier, IFPA starts a root cause analysis award program. So folks, member companies doing root cause analysis. Now we have FDA, as Mark mentioned, CDC and others promoting root cause analysis. We have a new initiative through the Healthy People 2030 RCA work group. There's a few of us on this webinar today. Myself, Jennifer was part of this, Natalie, Tim. We're on this working group to help promote, again, resource creation, training creation, and then dissemination of information across different agencies for, again, how do we learn from what we're doing? And then, of course, there are additional associations creating resources for root cause analysis. So you can see since 2019, there's been this tremendous amount of movement towards creating more resources to help produce what I would call competent folks who can do root cause analysis. So again, what Don was mentioning, what is the value of these things? There is no value if no one's doing them at all. And then there's definitely no value if we don't train people on how to do some basics. And that's really where we came from the LGMA and Western Growers perspective. Start with the basics. And of course, today we're doing the Contact RCA webinar series. Again, continue to promote root cause analysis. Next slide, please. And so considerations, as I mentioned, from an LGMA and Western Growers perspective, we are all about the keep it simple, right? So we're not trying to solve how the airplane follow the sky. We're not the CDC or the FDA trying to solve outbreak investigations. What we're trying to teach is fundamentals about if you have a problem on your farm that could potentially lead to a food safety concern, what is causing that, right? And try to dig into what may be causing it and then prevent it from happening by doing some corrective actions and long-term prevention. That's really what we're about. And also the other thing to consider, right? Mark had that one, the peach example where there was animal operations around them. We can control what we can control, and we emphasize that. Farmers, folks on the ground, they can control what they can control, but we're also working on other areas as an industry to break down some of those neighborly barriers to hopefully we can then work with our neighbors to find what some of these concerns are and prevent them as well. We try to confirm what we know. So again, there's a lot that's not known, unfortunately, especially from a risk characterization. They know a lot of the hazards out there, but what does that mean from a total risk perspective? There's still a lot of unknowns. So when we do our workshops and we do some of our trainings, we try to focus on what is known to give people confidence, that again, we do know some stuff. Just don't give up. Don't put your head in the sand. Don't think you can't figure it out. It's about to keep trying, right? Keep learning and keep improving. Use real world examples similarly to confirm what we know, but use things that people can understand and appreciate. Don't use too many commodity specific things because again, if you're one commodity versus another commodity, you might have bias because, oh, that's a leafy greens thing or that's a peach thing or whatever the case may be. But we try to use examples where they can bridge, transcend different commodities. And then of course, creating the partnerships for information dissemination. That's a big part of our root cause analysis working group with the Healthy People Initiative is how do we create these partnerships to really get this information out in the world so we can train extension agents, so we can train the folks that can help our farmers and we can train our farmers and our pre-farm gate folks to how to do these things. That's really the goal. And then long-term, how do we share this information to improve our metrics, to improve our gap standards so we can, again, decrease or eliminate these potential pathogen concerns that we all have. Next slide, please. So this is just a snapshot. This is the cover page of some of those Western Growers RCA resources I was mentioning. Very helpful. Again, they're in a lot of instances, the first three, the Appendix R, conducting root cause analysis, a how-to guide, and when to do root cause analysis are really trying to focus on basics. How do you do this stuff? The last one, considerations and resources for conducting an environmental investigation during an on-farm RCA. It's a little more complicated. It starts getting to some of the more microbiological ways of doing RCA. It talks about whole genome sequencing that Mark mentioned as well, and how you could potentially use something like that during an RCA. It's a little bit more in depth, that one. But again, it starts, right? Appendix R, really basics, and then it moves forward. As we again get better at this as an industry and we start learning, we can also improve these documents as well. Next slide, please. And I mentioned the LGMA root cause analysis workshops. Again, this is really just a fundamental way to get things started, right? We're not saying we're going to train the next outbreak investigation groups. What we're really, again, trying to focus on is how to get basic information out there to the public, to the farm, to the pre-farm gate community, so that they can start conducting some of these things on their own and feeling comfortable doing. Now, from the Healthy People perspective, as I mentioned, we are there to create resources. This picture you have here is an example of something that's in the works. Natalie was really a big part of creating this with myself and Afreen Malik from Western Growers. Again, it's just when we talk about resources and how do you do these things for folks that don't even know the starting point. Don mentioned all the different tools that are out there and their flaws and good things and bad things, right? But again, fundamentally, if you're going to start one of those things, where's the starting point? Where's the document, the template, the thing that says this is start here and this is how you go through it. So we're creating some of those documents and we hope to be able to share some of these things in the near future. And then lastly, of course, I was focusing on the produce pre-farm gate RCA type stuff, but there are other RCA trainings and resources out there where we can't. But in the big picture, RCA is very, whether again, you're looking at automotive industry improvements, airline industry, produce, fundamentally is a lot of very similar stuff. And so there's other resources out there. I just wanted to give a shout out to Randy Treadwell from AFTO. He provided me with this information that they have a root cause analysis online training for the retail food safety community. You can see the dates there. You can probably go to the AFTO website and see about signing up if you're a member of AFTO. But again, there's things out there, and their momentum is there to keep pushing the resource development. So we don't have a lot yet, but we're moving forward with more. And that was my part. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. We will move on to Natalie, and then we will stop recording and start the Q&A session. So keep those questions coming. There's some great ones. Natalie, it's all you.
All right, great. So we heard some really good information. Today's session was the what and the why around root cause analysis, leading us into next month's session, which will be about the how. So I'm going to try to take my almost 30 years of experience in the industry and distill it down into a bridge that kind of connects the what and the how to the why that we're going to get into next month. All right. So in my almost 30 years of doing this, I've heard a lot of different excuses as to why we shouldn't be doing root cause analysis. So I'm going to bust these myths. And number one is it is complex. We heard from Dawn that there are a lot of different ways to do it. We saw that crazy chart with all of those different tools, and the tools are important. And Greg talked about the tools that are available, but you know what? It doesn't have to be as complicated as solving string theory. It really is something where I think Greg just said, just start doing it and start doing something. So it doesn't have to be complicated. It can be something very simple. And some of you may have heard me give this example before, but I'm going to give you an example of the most simple, straightforward root cause analysis that I think I've probably done. And that is when I was working for a company that was a large multinational company. They had operations all over the world. And I get a call one day, and the operator said, the person in the country said to me, so I need permission to bring a mongoose into the store. Why do you need to bring a mongoose into the store? We have a snake problem. A snake problem? Yeah, a snake fell on top of a lady off the top shelf last week, and it's gotten social media attention. Oh, wow. Why do we have a snake problem? We have rats in the store, or we did, but the snakes took care of them. Oh, that's great, but why do we have rats in the store? Well, there were holes in the walls in the back of the store, and the rats just come in. Why are there holes? Well, the trucks, when they come to the store, they knock holes in the walls. Why aren't we fixing them? We are fixing them, but it's expensive and it keeps happening. Why don't we put some ballasts up? It's that simple. You don't have to do a lot of complicated things just to start asking the questions and getting it going. But it also needs to be cross-functional. You need to have the right people in the room. It shouldn't be just the FSQA team. It needs to be FSQA partnering with all of the other areas, operations, engineering, maintenance, whatever, so that you get the different perspectives in the room so that you're asking the right questions. So it doesn't have to be complex. It's not complicated. It's not complicated. So I would say that myth number one is busted. Now, let's move on to myth number two. It's expensive. It doesn't have to be expensive. So root cause analysis isn't something where, oh, every time it happens, you need to go out and hire an expensive contractor or something like that. You don't have to have fancy, expensive software tools or anything like that. It's something that you can just dive into, do on your own. Actually, quite frankly, it works best when you have it as an internal team operating on the root cause, because you know your process best. You know how things work. Now, I will say that once you get to the root cause, you have to do the corrective actions. And sometimes the corrective actions can be expensive, but I'm here to tell you that they will never be as expensive as the money you'll spend having to do a recall or ending up with an outbreak. So I think when it comes to relative expense, myth number two is busted. It's not nearly as expensive as the alternative. Myth number three, it takes way too much time. We all have a lot going on in our everyday lives. We all have a lot of issues that we have to address every day at the office. And when it You stop to think about, oh, having a root cause analysis, bringing a cross-functional team together, scheduling that meeting, it can actually seem a little daunting. And I get that. But think of it this way. If you are solving or addressing the same issue over and over again, I'm sure some of you are thinking in your operation, yeah, this one CAPA item is always in our CAPA system and we're always having to retrain or do something. It takes way more time to spend 30 minutes a week addressing the same problem for a year than it does to sit down and have a 2-hour meeting and cross-functionally talk through and work through the tools to say, what is our root cause, and address the actual cause instead of just putting a Band-Aid on the symptom. So if you think about it in those terms, it really doesn't take as much time as it does for us to just keep beating our head against the wall, doing the same thing. So with that, I think myth number 3, busted. Myth number 4, it creates a paper trail. Now, this is an interesting one, but I hear a lot of people say this. They don't want to do a root cause analysis because they don't want to document all of the problems they've had so that it can be used against them later on. But I think something you need to think about is you already have a paper trail. You already have the documentation that these things have been going wrong. And anyone who's ever heard Bill Marler speak about the Jack in the Box outbreak will remember that he talks about how Jack in the Box had these signals there. They had feedback from the employees that the grills weren't working. They had consumer complaints that products were undercooked, and they just didn't take action. Had they taken action, done a complete root cause, sure, they might have documented that their grills really weren't reaching temperature, but then they would have taken action. And I think that's the most important thing. So yes, it creates a paper trail, but it creates a paper trail that you're fixing the problem, not that you're leaving a problem hang out there. So myth number 4, busted. Finally, myth number 5, we don't need it. And I think this is probably the most common one I hear, because everybody assumes, and Mark brought this up in his presentation even anyway, everybody assumes that, oh yeah, we got this. We know it's in this cartoon, it was Brian's fault, right? We know how our operation works. We know the problem. We don't need to go through the process. We don't need to take the time. But here's the problem. If you don't go through the process, sometimes you end up asking the wrong questions or focusing on the wrong thing. And you're focusing on the symptom and not the actual root cause or the series of causes that are contributing to the situation. And you might, doing it this way, you might hit things here and there, but it's going to take you a lot longer to get to the root cause, as each time you do a corrective action, it doesn't work and it doesn't work and the issue keeps repeating. I would argue that you do need it. You do need to take the time to do it. You do need to go through the process and let the process work and lead you to the answer instead of just making assumptions, because we all know what happened there. Somebody didn't do something they were supposed to. So myth number 5, busted. In summary, I will just recap this for you guys. As an industry, I think this is why it's critically important that we actually embrace and do root cause analysis. And in my experience, it is an invaluable tool when you're in an operation and trying to address the problem so that you're not constantly fixing the thing. So it doesn't have to be complex. Yes, there's a large variety of tools. Find the one that works for you. Find the one that makes sense with the way that you think and way your team thinks, and just start using it and ask the questions and work through it. They don't have to require an investment just to conduct them. You don't have to have software. You don't have to have consultants. They can be completed by the company. And as I said, it is way less costly than a recall in the future. If you do the root cause analysis correctly, and I know that Dawn mentioned a lot of articles and research that says that they don't work, but I would argue, similar to what Greg said, that if the root cause didn't work, then you didn't do it right. So you didn't actually get to the root cause. You didn't actually get down to the situation that was creating the situation to begin with. Because if you do it correctly and you actually get to the root of the problem, you are going to always be faster in addressing things than continually just resolving and addressing problems. So it's always faster to do it the right way. In fact, somebody that I worked with at my last company actually used to say it's always less expensive to do it the right way the first time. And that's absolutely the case. root cause analysis documentation, I think I covered that. It doesn't leave a paper trail that could be used against you. I would argue that not doing it already has created a paper trail. And if anything, the paper trail from a root cause analysis actually helps you in your defense, because it shows that you are addressing the issue versus leaving something that is systemic completely unaddressed. And finally, focus on the investigation facts and not assumptions. So Mark recap that there's 2 steps that they take in FDI. There's the investigation to collect the facts, and then there's the methodology to analyze it. And I would say, yeah, follow the process and let it lead you to the problem, and don't just assume you know exactly who did what and jump ahead through the process. So with that, I'm done. Thank you.
Awesome, Natalie. That was super fun doing the myth busting. We do have about just shy of 20 minutes for questions. I see a number in the queue, and
Appreciate it. So take care, and we'll see y'all next month, October 5th, 3:30 Eastern. And I'll get
Thanks, everyone.
a follow-up email with all the resources and the posting of the recording.
Excellent. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you
Bye.
again.